I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon. This is episode number 235, and today in the show, we are talking about public land whitetails. We are talking about stalking down deer on the ground. We are discussing being mobile, first-time sits, finding the hot sign, and so much more. And to do that, we're joined by Zach Ferenbaugh of the Hunting Public. All right, real quick before we get this one started, we want to thank our friends at Lacrosse Boots for their support of this podcast episode. Lacrosse produces some of the best knee-high rubber boots out there for whitetail hunters. I've been wearing them for a very long time now. Both the Alpha Burley Pros and the Arrowheads, they've worked great for me. They are waterproof. They are scent-free as they come. They are comfortable. They keep you warm. They do just about anything you need a boot to do in the whitetail woods. Plus, they're available in many different camouflage options and solid green and yellow if you like that throwback look, which is what I'm rocking this year. Been very happy with that. So if you are interested in checking out Lacrosse boots for yourself, if you need some new kicks, head on over to lacrossefootwear.com and check them out. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast brought to you by Onyx. And today we're talking public land whitetails. And joining Dan and I is Zach Ferenbaugh. And if you're a YouTube watcher, you're probably or possibly familiar with Zach because of his work with Midwest Whitetail in the past and his current work with the Hunting Public. If you're not familiar with these guys, gotta check them out. The Hunting Public, it's one of the absolute best whitetail YouTube channels out there right now. And it's Zach and it's Aaron Warburton, who was a guest of ours last summer, and a handful of other guys. They're putting out almost daily video blogs showcasing their public land hunts all over the place. They're living in Iowa, but they're also going to other places like Nebraska, Kentucky, Missouri. I heard they're going to Alabama. Who knows? They're all over the place. They're doing a great job, and I think it's shining a great light on the public land opportunities that are out there. They're getting on some great bucks. They're showing that you can hunt quality mature deer even if you don't have a big farm and food plot. So I think that's awesome. I've really been enjoying what they're doing, and I think Zach's going to be a guy who has some interesting thoughts, some interesting stories. So I'm excited. Dan, I got to say though, I've been out chasing some public land bucks. Zach's chasing public land bucks. When are we going to get you to take the plunge?
What, and hunt public land?
Yeah, I got some stuff in here in Michigan that's just calling your name.
Oh, okay. So it has to be in Michigan.
Yeah.
I hunted on public last season, dude.
You did?
Early season.
Oh, I guess you did, didn't you?
I did.
Yeah.
And I hunted on public land this year during elk season.
That doesn't
count. I mean, that doesn't count?
No.
Okay. Okay.
Basically, I'm just trying to get you to leave your wonderful deer hunting and come down to my level so I feel less bad.
So basically what you're telling me is, hey, Dan, we need you to hunt really shitty ground.
Exactly, because you got it too good. Did you see that comment on Facebook today? Someone, you asked on the Nine Finger Chronicles Facebook page what people thought about high fence hunting, and someone
yeah.
and then someone comments, "Isn't that what it's like in Iowa?" Or isn't so? Do you mean Iowa bow hunting?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly like it.
Man, so how are you otherwise? You getting excited?
Yeah, dude, I'm starting to really think about this season a lot lately. Just from a planning standpoint, there's not much I can really do, but I know that I have a lot to do. So, man, I don't know. I just feel like I'm really, really, really behind this year. I haven't moved my trail cameras off the mineral sites yet because I've just been crazy busy. I haven't set up all the tree stands that I needed to set up because I've been crazy busy. I mean, all these are kind of excuses, but I'm playing this chess match right now, me and time, right? So I have to be here for my kids, and I got back on my elk hunt, right? So now I have to really focus on the family for the next, 2 weeks until I can get out. I might get out opening evening, October 1st, but then that weekend, my wife has stuff going on, so I have to babysit. So it's just like, I don't know, man. I don't know.
That's not easy.
Right. And I got inspired because I was talking to this guy on the Nine Finger Chronicles podcast this past weekend, and he's found a lot of success early season bow hunting. And I want to kill a deer early season so bad. Like I want to find one and kill one that meets my standards and not have to go into the rut for some reason this year. I want to get it done and get it done early.
More power to you, man. That early season, yeah. I mean the September hunts. Now I know you're not going to be hunting September, but I've really fallen in love with the September bow hunting. Catching them on that bed to feed pattern. They're really on a pattern, trying to decipher that quickly and make an adjustment and get on them. I mean, that's a lot of fun. And I know Zach, he's going to have some stuff to talk about that because they do that a lot.
Absolutely.
Certainly is possible. Now, oh God, I guess what I was going to ask you was going to be related to your trail cameras, but you haven't checked your trail cameras yet. This
one
in a long
time,
right? Yeah,
just one time.
And you're not going to check them until you start hunting. Is that, if I remember right?
I mean, I have this rule that says don't go into the timber during September, period. And I mean, a lot of those trail cameras are on the edge of the timber. Like I could drive to most of them, all except maybe two of them. But it's just, man, I want to know what's there. I want to know what happened with this shift, right? I want to get my trail camera. More importantly, I want to get my trail cameras in position for October, so that when the rut does hit, I have 4.5 weeks of data to let me know, hey, when some of this stuff is going down.
Yeah, I know you've got that September rule, but if you can drive to stuff, that might not be a bad idea, even though you're going to go in there. As long as you stay with your car running, just move the camera from wherever it's at to a mock scrape or a scrape on the edge of the field. And if you drive, put some nose jammer where you put the camera. I mean, that might be worth the tiny bit of negative risk you're taking there. Might be worth the increased intel you can get, especially if you're trying to kill one early, because that you're going to need some data to figure that out.
Yeah, that's a fact, man. I don't know. We'll see. We'll just see what happens. It's all based off time. Yeah. And if I can make it, I can make it. If I can't, I can't.
Yeah, I hear you there. I don't know what about my early season chances over here in Michigan. My main Holyfield farm over there, I've got one wireless camera that's working, and I haven't got crap on that. Just does and like a spike. Even though the food plot it's on looks beautiful, I got a scrape tree in there. All the does are hitting it, but nothing with any age. No sign of Holyfield yet. I've scouted a handful of nights watching over this area from the road. Nothing. Not a single buck other than 1.5 year olds. So that's discouraging. But the new property that I'm hunting, that other spot.
Well, I saw that pic, dude.
Yeah.
I saw that pic. I might hunt Michigan this year.
That's a pretty good looking buck, isn't it?
That one brow tine just makes me happy for some reason. I don't know why.
I think that is legitimately a 12-inch brow tine.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
You don't see that often.
I love big browse.
Yes, I agree. I've killed one deer with a really big brow tine. That buck 6-shooter that I killed a handful of years ago, he had a pretty cool brow tine. But I've never really got one of those deer that have those two just huge eye guards. That'd be awesome. So this deer's got one insanely long one, and he has been coming in and out. This camera is set up just inside from a little kind of food source. It's I think it's wheat or oats or something in it. And there's super thick bedding right off of the edge of this food source. And there's a little 2-track that cuts off of the field heading into that thick stuff. And so I put a camera on a mock scrape just along that 2-track, just inside off of the field. And so I drove in there and pulled that card, I don't know, this was a week ago or something. And this big boy's on there pretty consistent, leaving in the evening, coming back in the morning, in and out, same way. Still under the cover of darkness, but on the 12th or 13th or something like that, he was pretty close to daylight. It was like within an hour. So I'm glad to see there's a consistent mature buck like that coming in and out of there, and that's got me excited. So
yeah, it's always good when one of those shows up.
Yeah, it's right now the only mature buck I've seen on camera. So hoping for more good stuff to come soon, and you know how it is. Once October rolls in, at least for me in a lot of spots I hunt, it seems like I never have one of those farms just loaded with summer bucks. I'll take that back. The Ohio spot we hunted, that used to be loaded with summer bucks, but none of my Michigan areas. So fingers crossed that they show up, and when season kicks off, there'll be something to go after. But we got less than 2 weeks, right?
I know, man. I don't know whether I should be more excited or less excited, because I'm in this state of limbo now where I feel like if I get excited now, I'm just going to have my spirits crushed with, hey, okay, so we have plans for this, and this for this October, and then you got 3 kids, and I'm not going to watch them all the time. You went on a 1-week elk hunt, so there's that, and so I don't know. Every year, I don't know how this is for the guys out there who their wives kind of give them grief a little bit, but every year I have to have a conversation, and every year it's the same conversation as the conversation from the previous year. And then someone ends up not getting to do what they want to do, and someone like holds it against the other person.
Man, doesn't she get to do what she wants to do the rest of the year, though? Don't you pretty much give in the whole rest of the year because you're trying to save up your brownie points for right now? Yeah,
I do. But her things are like maybe one day at a time. So like for me, that elk hunt was 8 days, right?
Yeah.
That's 8 days of having to watch my 3 kids. Like Mark, I have full confidence that you can go out into the harshest mountains and survive for 8 days, but I'm not so sure I would put money on you if you had to watch my 3 kids for 8 days.
Yeah, they look rough. Maybe we need to do. I can't remember if this was last year or 2 years ago that I paid for babysitting for you.
Maybe for like one or 2 days.
Yeah, I got you a couple days of babysitting. I think maybe we need to create a Kickstarter for all the audience, the Wired Hunt audience, to chip in.
Hunt Kickstarter.
Chip in to get you some babysitting time.
Oh man, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I bet. Honest to God, I bet you we'd get a lot of money.
I know.
People want to see you hunt, Dan. They just want you to live out your dreams.
I know, and I'd probably just take that money.
Take your wife out to dinner.
Take her out to dinner, get those brownie points.
There you go.
But that's the goal in the next 2 weeks, is just make her as happy as humanly possible.
Well, you work hard at that, because we need some good stories from you this October. So,
oh yeah.
Should we get Zach on though, because Zach's already been hunting. He's got some good stories to tell, and I think we'll have an interesting conversation.
Sounds good.
All right, let's do it. All right, let's take a quick second here to thank our partners at Onyx. Onyx is the producer of the Onyx Hunt app, which is something that I'm using probably just about daily. It's something that I know that Zach is using almost daily. It's a tool that's going to allow you to see your aerial views of maps, it's going to allow you to see topographic views of maps, it's going to allow you to see property line information overlaid so you can see where the private property borders are, you can see where the public land is, you can see where trails are, campgrounds are, you can, oh my gosh, you can see so many different things. There's even, if you're heading out west, do some elk hunting or mule deer hunting, you can overlay where the recent burns have been. Back here in the Midwest and the East where we're worried about CWD, there's now a layer where you can overlay where CWD has been found. So many different options here. Tremendous tool. I'm heading off for an elk hunt tomorrow, and I will have my Onyx app up and running probably the entire time, tracking where I'm at, watching and seeing where I'm going, plotting out where we want to head next. Just something that I've found very valuable, and I imagine you would too. And if you are interested in checking it out, if you haven't yet, you can get the Onyx Hunt app over on just about any mobile app store. And if you use the promo code WIRED, WIRED, you can get 20% off your order. That promo code is WIRED. All right, we are back now with Zach Ferenbaugh. Welcome to the show, Zach.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat because, we had Aaron on the show last summer and enjoyed that conversation. But you are kind of like the wild card of the hunting public, I feel like. And my buddy Dan over here, he's like the wild card of the Wired Hunt podcast. So I needed to make sure to connect you guys. And this should be an interesting conversation because of that, I think. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I like that. I like the wild card name, or kind of being that guy. I like that.
Yep.
No expectations that way.
What's that?
No expectations that way.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the way I like it. No expectations.
What I think we got to do to get like the perfect hunter look would be to take Zach's hair and Dan's rut hunting beard, and if we combine those two things together, we'd have the most amazing bow hunting hair of anyone out there.
I agree 100%. I can't grow facial hair with a dam. Like, I just can't grow it. I've tried my whole life. I can't do it. So yeah, if I could get a beard on it, I would do it, but just can't make it happen.
Well, hey, I feel your pain, man. I'm right there with you. So can't have it all.
That's right.
So for those who are not familiar, when we had Aaron on the show last year, you guys hadn't started the hunting public yet. Can you give folks a kind of quick overview of how that came to be, and then we'll kind of go from there?
Yeah. Aaron, Greg, and we were all working at Midwest Whitetail. Those guys had been there for, I think both of them started in 2010. Greg started, and then 2011 Aaron started. And then I started there in 2015, and we worked there. We had a lot of buddies that worked there at different times too. And I guess it was just, kind of got to a point where we wanted to really start branching out and kind of take a risk and go out on our own and really own what we were doing. And, we just kind of went for it, I guess, and didn't really know if it was going to be anything that was, going to be sustainable, or, if it was, we were going to be able to continue to keep doing, just hunting industry type stuff. So I guess originally we just started simply like a production business, and our main goal was to, just do all kinds of different projects, anything from, senior photos, weddings, to, maybe some hunting videos. And the first couple months there in the fall, we just kind of used up all the money that, or what very, very little money we had. We just kind of used it all up and bought equipment and started hunting, and just started making hunting videos because that's what, we really wanted, what we were going to do until we ran out of money, and ended up, I guess gaining some traction there, enough to at least keep it going through the fall. And then our friends at Legendary Whitetails really helped us kind of keep it afloat there at the beginning. And we really, really very, very thankful for that. they helped us out a ton. And I guess they were kind of the first people to jump on board and really support us. And we were able to keep things going throughout the spring. And now, we don't have to do, or we're able to focus more on kind of the hunting side of the production business. And we do a lot of, stuff within the hunting industry. We do small projects for people, different hunting brands and stuff like that. And that's how, one of the ways that we're staying afloat. But yeah, just, I guess, gained just enough traction that we were able to kind of go full time into focusing on hunting videos. And, our main mission with starting all this was we just really wanted to have videos that were relatable. And our main, I guess, mission is to help get more people interested in hunting, get them, help people feel confident in hunting public land, showing people that, hey, there is options out there if you don't have a lease, or if you don't have a farm, or, if you can't afford those things, or, if you don't have permission or know somebody, whatever the case may be. We really, really, really want more people to get into the sport, get excited about doing it. We just don't want the population of hunters to keep decreasing. It's, to us, we feel it's an issue, and we want to get people excited about it, get people back out in the woods, and, have some fun along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. You guys are doing it. And I gotta give you mad props for, taking that leap. I know what that's like. I know that's scary, and trying to make it work on your own. That's no easy task. So, well done on making it through the first year. And it seems like you guys got lots of momentum, so I'm sure it's going to continue, but I'm excited for you guys.
Yeah, thanks. It was, like you said, it was pretty scary. Well, I guess when we first decided we were going to do it, it was like, well, here we go. We may just end up like doing something completely different in, a couple months, but, at least we've got some goals, and we just went for it, and glad we did.
Yeah. That's cool, and glad it worked out. And you, speaking of those early months, that brings me to the next thing I really want to talk about, which was Nebraska, because you guys took off last year right when you started this whole thing, and you headed out to Nebraska for this public land hunt, and that was really the first set of videos I think that you guys started putting out there. You went back to the same place again this year. Both of those hunts looked like they went really well. I would love to hear more about how that went this year, and then probably last year too. I'm interested in both of them. And Dan, you'll be interested to know this is kind of out in that neck of the woods that you really love in Nebraska. So I think if you haven't seen these videos they're putting out, you should check it out, because it's right up your alley with those big rolling grassy hills, and it looks like beautiful country, isn't it, Zach?
Oh yeah, the Nebraska sandhills are pretty vast. I mean, there's a lot of land, and fortunately there's a lot of public land, given people that anything from fishermen to bird hunters and deer, or mule deer hunters, whitetail hunters. There's all kinds of wildlife out there. It's a pretty incredible area.
It sure looks like it. So walk us through how you ended up putting together some success. I guess let's talk last year first, because I'm kind of interested in this progression. Now that you've had last year, what you learned from it, how that led to this year. I've watched those videos and got to see how you put it together, but I'd be curious to hear what your thought process was throughout those days.
Yeah, well, so I guess the first trip is actually pretty funny. It was the first videos that we produced, but we definitely, at this point in us, we were basically just jobless. We didn't really have any expectation totally yet of what we were doing. We just knew we wanted to try to, make a living filming and editing, using our talents of filming and editing. So again, we didn't really we wanted to make hunting videos, but we didn't really know. So we just took Aaron's camera that he'd bought years ago. We just went for it, Jake, Brody, and I, and we, I guess, essentially just started looking at maps a few days before we went, picked out a campsite, and just drove out there. We drove out there, I want to say it was around the 13th or 14th. I think it was, one of those 2 days. We drove out there, drove through the night, got there very early in the morning, slept for about an hour, and then I woke up and saw the sandhills for the first time and was just totally blown away. And, I guess by looking at maps beforehand, and Jake had actually hunted there in the late season before, so he had an idea of, what the area looked like. We had picked out several places on a map and, places that we wanted to check out. We got there and just started observing these areas that, we had suspected to be the best whitetail habitat. And pretty quickly we eliminated a lot of stuff just by, simply not observing deer coming out of the areas we thought they were going to be in. And we also just kind of got a little frustrated with that observing. And what we started doing was we'd see an area that, seemed like bedding habitat. Like we'd seen deer in very similar stuff, and we would just go in and we would still hunt it. And in the mornings specifically, and we would be still hunting and working back with those deer as they were coming back into the bedding areas. And we ran into some deer doing that, and we also got our best information by doing that. We would just go right through these bedding areas, and we were looking for buck sign. That time of the year, the deer have just shed. If you find a fresh rub right now, like, you better be thinking about that, I guess, in my opinion, at least. Like, that's the best sign to find bucks. And I don't run, I guess I shouldn't say I don't run them. My friends do, and I use their information, but I don't run trail cameras. I just like to run off sign, and that's something I'll probably talk about a lot. Is just looking at sign, looking at fresh sign, looking at big tracks, rubs, beds, all the scrapes, all kinds of deer sign, just really looking at that and trying to decipher that, and then trying to make a plan to set up on it. And that's what we were doing. We'd go in, and more than anything, just looking for rubs and big beds, and did that. And we had a lot of, or we'd find an area that we had a lot of confidence in, and we'd go back in there and we'd hunt it. And our whole strategy would be basically get in there and get set up right on top of beds and hope that they came right back into them. And we had some encounters, but then finally, well, I guess let me take one quick step back. The other thing that we would do is we would literally go through and do like deer drives, or we call them wind bumps, where we'd pick a bedding area. And what I would, and Brody and I both had tags, and he was an Iowa resident, but his brothers lived in Nebraska, so he'd go back and hunt in Nebraska. So we both had tags. But when we would go into these wind bumps, I would bump out these areas, and I would just go through them, letting my wind drift through the bedding area. The deer would bump out in front of me, and I would just basically be scouting my way through these spots. And pretty far into the trip.
Before you go any further, Zach, sorry. Can you elaborate on the wind bumping? So why you're doing it that way and what you're trying to achieve with that?
Well, there's two main things that we were trying to learn and achieve. I mean, for one, we straight up trying to get a deer. Like, we've had it work in the past, where, a deer comes out of the bedding area and offers, the guy set up a shot. A lot of times the guy's just sitting on the backside of a bedding area on a funnel and hoping that the deer escape calmly, by letting our scent drift in there. Generally the deer escape quite a bit calmer than if you walk through, making a bunch of noise like a traditional deer drive. I'm basically still hunting through these bedding areas, just letting my scent go, kind of opposite of what you would normally have. Generally still hunting, you're going to have a wind in your face or a crosswind. And in this situation, I'm just going through this bedding area, more or less scouting with the wind at my back. Mm-hmm. So that's, goal number one is simply shoot a deer and having a strategy, it's an off the wall strategy. It's totally different than most people are going into a bow hunting approach, I guess. But the other thing is just trying to find that sign, It's like, unless we were going into these bedding areas, we didn't know. I mean, they're so thick, they're so dense that, like, these bucks, if they don't leave and go out into the open, you never know they're there unless you get in there and you either bump them or just scout around enough to where you're finding the sign coming out of these bedding areas. I mean, you got to get close because they're not moving a lot that time of the year. They're very, very small areas. So we went into this wind bump one day, and like I said, it was pretty far along in the trip, and I bumped a buck, and I watched him run out of the bedding area the wrong way. He wasn't going towards Jake and Brody, but I watched him go up over the hill, and I was like, ooh, like that's a nice one. We've been seeing, there's not a super old age class out there, so to see a real nice 8-pointer run up over the hill, I was like we really need to think about this and see if we can, figure out how to hunt it. So I continued to just scout that whole thing, and it wasn't a super big piece, maybe 10, 15 acres, but just a super dense piece of habitat. There was all different types of vegetation in there, and there was tons of, basically just a bedding area and a food source all in one. And there was tons and tons of beds and tons of rubs in there. Found some scrapes as well. And I was like, this is something, again, that we really need to think about, and hopefully he'll come back. But, I was like, it's such a good bedding area in here. So many deer are using it. I did jump other deer out of there, some does, but it was like, even if he doesn't come back, the one that I just jumped, surely another buck will be back in here in the next few days, at least before we leave. So I scouted the whole thing, almost every inch of it in that day that I wind bumped after I bumped that buck. Tried to figure it out, left my scent all over the place in there. I mean, was laying in the beds, was seeing what they could see, was scouting it right in the middle of the trip. So we waited a couple days, and we went in there, hunted it one day, and then, like I said, waited a couple days, hunted it, saw most of the deer that I jumped out of there come back except for that buck. And then we hunted it again the next morning, which I think would have been like 3 days out from when I went through it wind bumping and scouting. And right at first light, heard a deer come in, walked right around us, and it was only about 30 yards away, but we couldn't see because it was so thick in there. Heard it bed down, and about 8 o'clock, 8:30 maybe, the wind started picking up. When that wind picked up, he got up and he shifted his bed. Then he walked to like 10 yards in front of the stand. It was the same buck that I jumped out of there just a few days earlier. He walked to 10 yards and he was browsing, had no idea we were in the world, and I just had a perfect shot at him. And, that was kind of an eye-opener for me. And I talked to a lot of people about it since, and found that a lot of people also use somewhat of a similar strategy. It may not be directly trying to bump the deer, but at the same time, there are other guys that are doing stuff like that. And it really got me thinking a lot, just about, how you come across the best stuff. And what I kind of came down to is, you're looking for that fresh sign, that sign that is being laid down right now. And I think sometimes guys will get, and myself included, for sure. I mean, my goal is to not do this as much as possible this year. It's like I get super fired up about a spot that I found in like February, right? Like I'm out looking for sheds and trying to find the best deer sign. Well, what you're finding then is you're finding a whole year's worth of sign, and it's sometimes hard to decipher, okay, is that made in October? Is that made in September? Is that made in December? I mean, it's hard to tell. And I think that I went in and wasted a lot of sits because I was hunting sign that I saw in February that wasn't actually laid down in the time that I thought that it was. Like, I'm like, oh, this is going to be awesome on November 4th. Well, you get in there and the sign's dry. I mean, the deer were in there in October. You're a month late, or you're 2 months late. Maybe it's September when they first shed. And I think kind of doing that style of hunting and being mobile and doing kind of off-the-wall type stuff allows you to find that hot sign. And in reality, when you find those best areas where the highest concentrations of deer are, like, the deer aren't just going to leave. I mean, I think that, and I've had the argument, too, of like, in more pressured states, than Iowa, for example, those deer aren't going to come back. Well, I don't agree with that, because if you find a place where they all want to be, I mean, I grew up hunting Western Ohio. Like, there's more pressure there than, than anywhere else I've been to this point for whitetails. And there's small woodlots where people would go in and hunt. They'll bump them out of bedding areas and they may be gone for a couple of days. But if you find that best spot, like, there's nowhere better. Like, they're going to come back to it because it has all the factors that they need. They may leave for a few days or something, or maybe even a week. But at some point, if all the deer feel comfortable there, if it's a pretty well set up bedding area with all the factors that they need and good escape routes, then they're going to come back.
Now,
and sometimes, it just takes a little bit of weird tactics to find that.
Yeah. Now, would you agree with this, though, that going about it in that kind of way, it's high risk, high reward, right? So you definitely could have that, like you said, you might bump him out of there for a few days, or you might get a buck that maybe he's going to stick around there, but he's just not going to move during daylight. He might be back to that bed well before daylight in the morning, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a lot of people that are probably listening to this, and they're like, oh, that's crazy. I'm never going to do that because, you're supposed to have this sanctuary and you leave these deer untouched, blah, blah, blah. Would you say that if you're hunting, if you've got like one little spot that you can hunt, you've got your 20-acre property at home, and that's the one spot you hunt, maybe you don't want to go in there and do this kind of thing all the time because you're going to blow it out. But if you're in a situation like you're at, where you're on public land, you're just there 7 days, so you got nothing to lose because you need to get it done now. Or I feel like what you've got going on in Iowa is you guys are really aggressive, but you have lots and lots and lots of different spots. Same thing with like Dan Infalt. He's super aggressive, but if you blow out spot A, that's fine because I'm going to spot B and then spot C and D, E, F, G. I mean, is that the right way to think about this?
No, it is 100%. I guess I maybe should have said that beforehand. And I guess I've always been this way. Even, as soon as I got my driver's license, I was going to go to a place that I was going to get away from Western Ohio, like to where I had that option. I guess if you're going to hunt aggressively, I think that you have to put yourself in a situation where, now whether it's hunting public or private, maybe you've got multiple different pieces of private land and some public mixed in, or all public, or just a ton of pieces of private land. You have to have multiple different areas that you can go to. You have to be able to bounce, and that's the key. We do these aggressive tactics, but like you said, we've got so many places that we'll never touch in a season that we've scouted in the past, and we've got ideas of how we would hunt it, but there's just simply not enough time for it. And I think that if you're going to hunt aggressively like this, then you should have lots of different options. And I think that there's ways to hunt aggressively like this with not as many options as maybe we have or even your buddy has, but I think that at some point throughout the season, it is always worth getting aggressive. If there's one pet peeve I have, it's just people being like, I gotta wait, or I gotta, the wind is just not perfect. Well, sometimes you gotta get in there when the time is right. And I think that people, and again, like myself included, like I think all this because of like all the times that I just thought I was being careful, but in reality, I was just getting in such a rut that the deer were patterning me. I wasn't changing it up enough.
Yeah.
So, quick question here. On top of being aggressive, there's like, whether you're aggressive or you're conservative in your approach to actually going after a deer, there's still some preparation that has to happen on the front end of that, and what that sounds like you're doing is this scouting at a very high and fast level to locate the animal. Break that down for us and kind of tell us what that scouting, that speed scouting is like for you guys.
Yeah. So, I guess when we go into an area, we really try to focus on setting up on that hot sign or finding that hot sign. And I always my best way to explain like what exactly we're looking for is the highest concentration of the best sign in that area. So you've got an idea of what your deer density is like in the properties that you hunt, and you know what when you know what it looks like when there's a bunch of bucks in an area. You kind of have that idea of how many rubs per acre there are, or how many scrapes per acre there are. Like when you're looking for that hot sign, when it really jumps out at you of like, holy cow, like there's scrapes, there's rubs, there's tracks, there's bucks, there's does, there's all the deer kind of, they're all just kind of in this small area. You know the difference of that versus, a little bit of sign. Does that make sense? Like all of a sudden for that area, for that deer density, like there's max sign.
Yeah.
And when you find that, it's just like, whoa, it almost smells like buck in there. Like there's just scrapes, there's rubs, beds. And that's what, we're really looking for, is that highest concentration of deer sign. And,
so
again,
how long are you in that area until you end up bailing and going to the next spot?
It really depends. I would say if it looks really good, we'll get in there and we kind of ease our way. Like, for example, a lot of times we have a bedding area that we've previously scouted in mind. So, we know there's a good, bedding area deep in this piece of public, or maybe there's 2 or 3 along the way. And as we're scouting through there, we're just kind of hitting the downwind side of that bedding area, just kind of skirting the outskirts of it, looking for good sign coming out of it. If we hit it at the first one, then, we'll set up there for the day. And then if we don't hit it on the first one, we'll go to the next one. And, it just gives kind of sometimes it's a day-to-day thing. Sometimes it's in one hunt, you may cover 2 or 3 bedding areas just trying to find the right one that's got that sign. Sometimes we'll sit on the same bedding area, for multiple days. It's something we haven't done a ton of in the past. Some of the bucks that we've shot in the past few years have been, kind of hunting a bedding area repetitively until, the buck gives you the right opportunity. But a lot of the bucks that we've shot the past few years have been first time sits. But something that I'm a little bit more interested in is just like seeing how much we can get away with, and like how much it actually takes to drive deer out of an area. This year, I'd like to try to focus on one or a couple bedding areas or a general spot, for 3, 4, 5 days at a time, and just see, just kind of push it a little bit and see what happens. Just try to learn something from that.
Yeah.
But I guess again, just day to day, spot to spot.
Now, when you're doing this in-season scouting, you're walking along, you find one of these bedding areas where you're seeing that hot sign. You're seeing a lot that the concentration is right. It's this is going to be a spot we need to hit now. Walk me through the thought process from that moment on. Like, what are you looking for to help determine, okay, where do we need to set up? How do we think they're going to come out of here? What's that next step from, okay, yeah, this is the great area, to finding that perfect spot within the spot that you're going to actually sit, and how you approach that?
Yeah, so I can actually use an example from Nebraska from this season, which is actually ends up being where I ended up getting the buck this year. The first day we went in there was a piece that was, there's a road that went through the middle of it that was just public access. Like you could park at multiple different pull-offs down this road, but it was just this sand road that went through the piece. And we ended up driving down that road and just trying to get a feel for the habitat. And we jumped a couple bucks, and one of them was the one I ended up killing, but we were like, that's a big one. Like, that's the biggest one we've seen the whole trip, and we kind of freaked out. Ended up going back, turning around, going back to the first pull-off, and then going back right back after him. Like, they had just jumped out of that bedding area, but we suspected they weren't going to go far, and they would probably come right back, just running away from the vehicle. We didn't figure that they would leave the county, So how we approach that is like, this is a little bit different situation. Like, we didn't find the sign, but but we knew they were in there. So how we went about approaching it is like we just kind of got to a high point, so where we could see that bedding area and we could see kind of how the land laid. And from that, Logan and I, the guy that I was with, we just were glassing that whole area, and we're looking for just little terrain features that in ways that, just little mini funnels, just where we would expect trails to kind of go through this piece of land, through this little creek bottom. And we just kind of kept getting to different high points and looking at it from different angles. And then we eventually were like, okay, this is the best funnel. We're right on this point of the creek. Ended up getting down there, and one of the 2 bucks that we jumped ended up coming right down one of those trails, and he caught our wind before we got a good shot at him. But, essentially the plan worked. He was coming right down the pipe, right where we expected him to. Just the wind kind of messed us up, totally messed us up. But, that's one example, is just kind of getting a feel by looking at it. Okay, how does that terrain lay? And just from past experiences, you get pretty good idea of how deer are going to work through a creek bottom. But I guess in a different situation, if I was walking through an area, scouting it, like the one I shot in Nebraska last year, like I'm in that area and seeing all that sign, I'm looking at how the trails are oriented in there, looking at how the beds are oriented, thinking about which wind those deer are bedding there on. And, in that situation with the one I shot last year in Nebraska, a lot of those beds were set up for south wind. They were kind of cover it back facing to the north. So with that south wind, they've got cover behind them, wind coming, at their back, and they're looking out into an open area. So with that kind of info, that's how we decided to hunt it. And that's the wind that he was in there on, and we ended up getting him. It's just a lot of different factors. Sometimes I'm bad at, I guess, thinking of all of the situations, because it's always so different. Sometimes you're just walking through an area and you're like, all right, up on this ridge in big timber, maybe the side hill has where there's a bench, and maybe there's an old, clear cut down there. Well, there's a hard transition line there, and right off the hard transition line, there's just tons of, heavily used scrapes. It's like, well, those bucks are working that transition line. They're scraping down along through there, and that's as simple as it is. Like, you hit that scrape line, you're like, okay, we need to back out of here and, come back on a time when we feel like we're going to hunt these scrapes, or maybe you hunt it that day. Every situation just varies so much, but, our main mission is to be right where, the most hot sign kind of comes together.
Yeah. You just mentioned something I was kind of curious about your opinion on, which is the question right there. You find the sign, do you hunt right away, or do you say, well, I got to give it a few days to rest because I just came in here, maybe you hung a stand or whatever it might be? I've always kind of been in the mind that you should hunt it right then and there, because maybe you can get them coming back the one time that they don't know something was there. But what's your take on that?
Again, it varies. I'm kind of the same way that you just said. Like, I like to get aggressive. Like, I like to try to break all the rules. You know what I mean? Like, I like to wind bump it and then go set up on it, that day. Whatever. Like, just do something weird and just try something different. But a lot of times I would say it depends on how much impact you feel like you've got. If you just kind of get into the edge of it and you're still downwind of all the bedding, or where you think the majority of the deer are, and you pick up on a real hot scrape right on the edge of a transition line that you think a buck's going to show up there in daylight, hunt it right then. Just hang a stand up and hunt it, or set up on the ground, whatever you want to do. But if you go through a whole bedding area, you're bumping deer, there's a high impact, you're leaving your scent all over in the middle of the bedding area. A lot of times in that situation, give it generally 2 days. So, just saying, let's say on November 6th, we go blow up the world in a bedding area, but we're like, that's the hot stuff. Like, that's the best stuff we've seen in the past week. Then maybe on November 9th, we would go back in there on the wind that we felt was right and hope for the best. It just depends on how much you feel that impact is going to throw the deer off.
Yeah, I follow you. So continue with that Nebraska situation here this year. You found these bucks, you moved in there, you had the one catch your wind. What was your plan from there on out?
So there was another little factor in there that I haven't included yet. There were some other guys who have actually just got a hold of me. They just messaged me today and thought that was pretty cool. Kind of got to figure out what they were doing a little bit more and what we were doing, and just kind of communicate a little bit better. But
Nice.
There was these other guys that were hunting in there, and they were going way back deeper into the piece of public. So they were driving right past this bedding area that we were hunting. And the reason that we found these deer is because we drove past the bedding area and they jumped up. So when we were making that first move that first night, they came down that road, and Logan, who was with me, ran up there and asked, if they would just like hold off, or at least just park at the first pull off and not, go past them, because we knew that they were in there. And very, very kindly of them, they were like, yeah, go for it. Make a move on them. And we'll just hold off for the evening. So that we're super thankful for that. Super, super cool of them to do that. And ended up making that move. But we knew that those guys were hunting back there, so that they were driving past that bedding area a lot. And, at least 4 times a day. And we waited a couple days. I guess we hunted it that next morning and didn't see much. So, we went through that whole ordeal where we jumped them, almost got the one. And then the next morning we hunted it, but nothing really came back into that bedding area. So we gave it a couple days, I think 2 full days. And we went in there on the 5th day of season. I guess it would have been 2.5 days, something like that. Doesn't really matter. About 2 days. Went back in there on the 5th day of season in the afternoon, and we pulled in, and I was like, man, like, it looks like there's been people back in here. And there's tracks on the sand and vehicle tracks. And we were like, well, let's try it anyway. We got to know, just got to at least mark it off that, they've moved on and they've moved to a different bedding area. And walked back, got about halfway back there, and saw where those tire tracks had actually stopped and turned around. Well, it must have been somebody else other than those guys, because I now know that they had left after day 3. So they hadn't been back there for a couple days either. So get back there, and all of a sudden it goes from fresh tire tracks on the sand access road to like nothing but deer tracks on top of old tire tracks. I'm like, okay, we might be in business here. And we crept up to the very spot where we turned around and those deer jumped up that first day. I crawled up, and I decided that I was going to just look into that bedding area and glass down there until I saw a deer moving. And if I knew a deer was down in there, at least just even one, even just a flicker of a tail, that was going to be enough for us to kind of make a play on him, get to a setup. I didn't want to go right back into it and like waste a whole hunt if I didn't think that there were deer in there. So I decided I would sit there for an hour, glass right into that bedding area, kind of had a pretty good vantage to where I could see down into it. And that was my whole plan, was look at it for an hour. If it's no good, we're just going to keep moving and try to figure out where they've moved to. So I'm laying there glassing with my binos just down into this bedding area. I'm not very far from it. I'm only, probably 60 yards from the edge of it. But I just had the wind right, and I was just peeking over from a high point and was looking down in there. Wasn't seeing anything. Was kind of starting to get a little bit discouraged, and all of a sudden I looked down, and that big one was laying there 70 yards from me, looking the other way.
The whole time he was there?
And he was there the whole time.
Wow.
He was just bedded. And I was like, no way I'm looking at that, right? I'm like, there's no way. And his ear flicked, and I was like, you got to be kidding me. Like, he's 70 yards from me, like, has no idea. And Logan's kind of back behind me, hiding a little bit more. I peek back over, and I, like, give him the signal, like, buck bedded, you know. He crawls up to me, and I show him where the buck is, and he sees it. He starts filming, and I knew that there was no way that we were both going to be able to get down in there. Like, you know, we were already close. And now, granted, we could have, I guess a million things went through my head in, like, a pretty short period of time, because I didn't want to wait around too long. Like, either got to go for this thing right now in his bed, or we're going to have to loop around and try to set up on a spot where he's going to, you know, maybe walk past. But now you're talking, if you go set up, now you're talking about he can go just about any direction, you know, if he gets up out of that bed. Now, we could have got really, really close and put our odds pretty high, but it's like, we know literally right where he's at right now. So I just kind of studied, you know, how the wind was playing through the creek bottom, looked at, you know, as best I could tell the way his body was oriented in that bed. And I started kind of making plans of, okay, how can I approach this to where he's not going to see me or smell me or hear me coming? And I knew Logan would be able to film him from up on top there where I'd spotted him from. So I was like, all right, you see that cedar right there? That's where I'm going to try to get to. I'd ranged him, the buck, and he was at 70, and that cedar was at 55. So I thought, if I can get to that cedar, it looks like I'll have an opening, and it looks like he'll be broadside to that spot that I'm going to get to. So for like the next hour and a half, I just crawled. And I mean, just painful. Probably about 2 hours, actually. And only, you know, maybe a grand total of, you know, 40-some yards. Well, I've been a little bit further than that, about 50 yards. And I crawled, and I crawled, and I crawled. And I was like, just every time the wind would blow, I'd pick my bow up, and I would just mat the grass down in front of me. And I was on, I would just kind of try to follow any tiny little low spot I could get to. I mean, just being super meticulous about every little thing that I did, because it's like, I just don't want to spook him. You know, at the very least, I don't want to spook him and blow him out of here, because, like, we now know that he's been in here twice, and, like, we got a really good chance. But I also thought I had a really good chance if I could get up to that cedar that I'd actually be able to get shot. So after, like, 2 hours, somewhere between an hour and a half, 2 hours, I eventually get to that cedar. And I just barely peek up at Logan, and he's still filming that spot. And I'm like, well, he must still be there. So I peek around the right side of the cedar, and I'm like, son of a gun, I don't see him over there. I'm glassing down there. I thought maybe now that I'm lower, I can't see, you know, quite as well as I could from that vantage. I looked and looked and looked, and finally I was like, well, I'm going to have to try to get to the other side of the tree. So I crawled around to the side of the tree. I mean, just painfully slow. And as soon as I poked my head around, I was like, yep, right there he is. And I mean, he's close. And I hit him with the range, and he's still looking the other way, bedded.
Wow. And
I hit him with the rangefinder. 19 yards, hit it again. 19, hit it again. 19. I was like, good enough. So I put my release on. Well, a bunch of sand stuck in my release. I started panicking because I couldn't get my release open. So I got that figured out. And right as that happened, the other buck that we almost got a few nights prior stands up out of his bed and starts grunting, walking towards the big one. And this is all while I can't get my release open, which I did, like I said, get figured out. But finally get my release on. This little buck, or, well, you know, buck, the other buck, I don't want to say little buck, because I would have shot him any other day. He's walking right at the bigger one, grunting, and he walks right up to him, and the whole time the big buck is just, like, totally disregarding him. He's, like, totally ignoring him. And I'm just got my mindset on this hole. I know he's going to be broadside when he stands up. I know that his vitals should be exposed in this, you know, perfect little hole right there, about the size of a basketball. And I'm just focusing on that spot, not moving. That little buck walks to like 10 yards from me and is looking at Logan, can see Logan on top of the hill, can't tell what he is, starts kind of seeing me, this all took probably 10, 15 minutes. And he's looking at me, looking at Logan, stomps a little bit, eventually just gives up on it because he can't figure it out. We're both wearing ghillie suits. And he just kind of walks around that buck, walks right up to him, puts his head on right into the bed, and then eventually just walked away. And I was like, I cannot believe he didn't get up. Like, I thought for sure that little buck would at least make him stand up for a second. And I was like, well, maybe, I really hated if he, got to till dark and, this buck never stands up. But anyway, I keep sitting there and I'm just focusing on the spot. And finally, like, stupid, it was almost cost me. I looked back at Logan just to make sure that he wasn't, like, having camera issues or anything, making sure that he wasn't, like, calling me off or anything. And I look at him, everything looks good. And as I look back, he's starting to stand up. And I was like, oh, no. Like, as soon as he moved, I wanted to be drawing. Like, I almost messed up. And he just stood up and he looked right in my direction. I mean, he was facing me, or he was broadside, but he was, his head was looking at me. And I was just like, well, it's now or never. Like, if he takes one step, he's out of that hole. And I just drew back, put it on him, shot him.
Wow.
and yeah, double lunged him, and pretty weird story. Like, I mean, I won't dive into it too much. I'm sure there'll be plenty included in the video if anybody's interested, I guess. But it hit him in both lungs, and he bedded 3 times. We bumped him once. He bedded 3 times and went like almost 400 yards. And it hit him square, like 10 ring right behind the shoulder. Weirdest thing I've ever seen. Very, very weird. We could talk about that for a long time, I guess. But it was wild.
Yeah, I'll tell you, you're a wild man, dude. Going in there like that, ghillie suiting it, crawling for hundreds of yards into there. I gotta wonder. You said that this video of the final hunt is 45 minutes long. Is it just 45 minutes of you crawling the entire time? I hope it is.
No, but I'm sure there'll be plenty of that. I'm sure it'll be pretty funny.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was, it's just one of those deals, it's like, I know he's right there. Like, I hate leaving deer, like, not getting as close to where they are as possible when you know exactly, like, their exact coordinates, You
couldn't like, ask for better
I just
intel.
think, yeah, I just always think it's silly, like, had a lot of people be like, yeah, I saw a big one and watched him bed down, and we're gonna have to go after him in a couple days when we get the right wind. It's like, you watched him bed down and you left, or like you watched him go into a bedding area and you left. It's like, that's, he's there. If you know right where he's at, like, just hunt that spot. And I guess that's kind of what I was thinking about, is like I know I'm gonna be mad if I don't try it. I gotta at least try it.
Yeah.
And it was pretty painful. Like, I got all kinds of weird stuff still stuck in my body from that crawl. Like, there's cactus out there, sandburrs, like, whatever else is laying out there on the sand hills, and like, I still got some pretty weird stuff on me, but it was well worth it.
Yeah, I bet. Dan, what are you thinking about all this?
I think I need to hunt more out of state and buy a ghillie suit.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think buying a ghillie suit is, well, just having that option has really changed my whole perspective on hunting. I'm pretty wired guy. Like, I'm drink a lot of coffee. I get pretty excited. I do a lot of jumping around, and I'm pretty antsy. And I'm not a stand guy. Like, it just doesn't work for my personality very well. Like, I don't like to sit. Like, the guys that can sit all day during the rut, like, I have so much respect for that, because like, I cannot do it. I can't sit for like that sounds. It just the thought of it is horrible to me, to sit all day in one stand. I mean, I've done it a lot, but I don't like it.
Yeah, it's pretty
Put
brutal.
it that way.
Dan, this might be like a revolutionary idea for you, Dan, because Dan has got these bad knees because of how old he is. So
oh, you bastard!
he's not able to do those all day rut sits either. So maybe this is the key. Maybe you need this ghillie suit tactic.
Yeah, my luck, I just fall asleep in the grass.
Yeah, hey. Oh, I do plenty of that, man. No doubt. Falling asleep in the grass a lot.
So you gotta tell us more though about how you're pulling off these ground stalks and everything, because I know you did this in Iowa last year too. Talk to us a little bit about just the things that you're thinking about to make that work, how you're going about the still hunting deal, how the ghillie suit's helping you, anything else like that. But first, let's take our last break of the day to thank our friends at Whitetail Properties. And Whitetail Properties just launched a new video on their YouTube channel in that Land Beat YouTube series that I've been talking about. And this one's pretty interesting. It's called Broadhead Myths Debunked. And it talks to an archery expert who walks us through how he went and tested all the broadheads on the market to see which one flew the best, which were the most consistent, what are the best broadheads to use out there. He shares us his results in this video. They are not going to be what you expect. It's kind of a surprise result he's got there. It's very interesting. Highly recommend checking it out, especially if your season hasn't opened yet. You're still trying to figure out what broadheads you're going to shoot this year. You definitely want to check this one out. So head on over to the Whitetail Properties YouTube channel. Check out the Broadhead Myths Debunked video. And you can also learn more about what Whitetail Properties has got going on by going to whitetailproperties.com.
Yeah, well, I've always had like an interest in hunting on the ground because, like I said, I've just been too impatient to sit tree stand setups for, a whole season. And, I really, I started watching Whitetail Adrenaline a few years ago and was like, man, like that just looks so fun. And like, I really, really was inspired by, just something different, it wasn't, and they don't talk a lot about exactly like all their theories and stuff of of how they're approaching it. But like, it was like, it's working. And that's really all that I needed to know is like, somebody's out there trying it. And like, I want to try that too, just because, I want to do something different. I don't want to just be limited to tree stands. And I also just like to move around a lot. And, that was kind of the, watching those guys was the inspiration to just go for it. It's like, okay, somebody's doing it out there. And when I first started doing it, I think that, my friends kind of thought that it was stupid and a little crazy. But once we started doing it and we were wearing those ghillie suits, like those deer cannot figure out what's going on. Like I don't know that in a setup, like where we were actually set up on the ground, the deer's ever spotted us. Like they've smelled us, but I don't think one's ever actually just picked us off. Now, a million times in my life, I've had deer pick me off in the tree stand, and in higher pressured areas or higher pressured states, like I'm sure Mark you're dealing with in Michigan or like where I grew up in Western Ohio. Like deer are looking for hunters in tree stands.
Yeah.
And I see that even here in Iowa on public ground. Like if we get a deer to get downwind of us, the first thing that they do is look in the trees.
Yeah.
And they have no idea where we are. And like it's been pretty crazy. I mean, that's two guys on the ground hiding in ghillie suits and they cannot figure it out. And they'll be, in easy bow range and they still can't figure out where we're at. And if you think about how a white, if you've read anything about how whitetails can see, or, just there's a decent amount of research. Like, you can't see anything but movement very well. And, with that ghillie suit, you're just breaking up that human shape.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have the head and shoulders, and that, I think, is ultimately what, is kind of is really the make or break of it. Is like, if they see your head and shoulders, they're gone. But if they can't see that, and the ghillie suit just does an incredible job of just, breaking that up. I also have probably close to a foot long hair, so like that helps break up the head and shoulders.
It's like the ghillie haircut. You got to have that too.
Hey, quick question. How much does one of those ghillie suits cost?
Man, I don't really know. Ours, the ones that we got, a friend actually gave them to us, and they were like, I think if you look for them online, you can find them. I want to say, it's bushrag.com, and that's where you can find the exact ones that we're wearing. I don't know how much they cost because we didn't actually buy them, but I want to say that they're relatively inexpensive, like, what you would be spending on a tree stand or something like that.
And man, those whitetail adrenaline guys, don't they just make them themselves? Like, those are homemade.
Yeah. And I think like my friend Jake, who works with us, he's built his own in the past, and his grandma sewed one together for him one time. And when I was growing up, me and my dad always used leafy suits, like especially for turkey hunting. Those, they're basically just have like maple leaves that kind of hang off of them. I think all that stuff will work. Anything that'll match the color of the habitat that you're in, and that's going to break up that head and shoulders, is going to work. Something, I guess, not to get off the ghillie subject, but kind of, I want to do it without a ghillie now. Like, I want to just like wear like a solid like color, like tan or brown, and just do it without the ghillie, because I think that's still possible too. It's just a lot of it's being aware of your surroundings and, like, again, trying to get that human shape broken up. And I think the ghillie suit makes that super easy, but I think it would be fun to just, try it without it a couple times, see if it can be pulled off. I mean, people are doing it for sure. It's just kind of a fun challenge, I think, would be to just kind of go without even wearing camo, just wear like a tan long sleeve shirt or something. I think it can work.
And like I was saying, the wild card, you can try it in a flannel.
Dude, I agree, dude. I don't think camo is as important as people think it is.
Mm-mm. No, I don't at all. I think, there's all kinds of different camo patterns that guys are wearing out there, and they're all, everybody's, having success with all different types of stuff.
Yeah.
The biggest thing is just blending with your surroundings as best as you can. And I think sometimes, like a lot of people's grandpas hunted in like red flannels. My grandpa hunted, and his hunting clothes was like a red flannel and like, bib, like tan bibs. That's both my grandpas hunted in that stuff for years. Now they wear camo, but for years and years, that's what people hunted in. And like, that the color red or hunter orange, so I think sometimes people are like, oh, you could never wear that. Well, deer don't see color like we see color. I'm no expert on that by any means, but like, obviously they don't, or they'd be running from every guy that was wearing hunter orange during gun season just nonstop. They never stop running. But it's, I don't think it's quite as important as some people make it out to be. It's just blending with your surroundings is, so.
Yeah. I think, Dan, what you need to do is just get a full blue suit, all blue, and if you do that, I think that's going to be the ticket to your success, Dan.
They'll put me up there with the greats then, right?
Yes, they would, if you could pull it off. Because that's like the one color that really does pop to whitetails, while orange and red blends in gray. Blue would be the toughest. So if you end up getting to kill a buck wearing like tan solid stuff, Zach, then you really do need to try blue. That'll be like the final test, if you can really fool them.
Or with a headlamp on.
Hey, I've read that that thing about the blue, so you never know. Wild card out here. Who knows?
Breaking rules. So you're wearing the ghillie suit. You're stalking on these deer. Are you going to go and use this kind of tactic on any day, or are you waiting for certain conditions? Like, do you just use this when it's nice and windy or rainy or something like that to break up your sound, or what about that?
That's actually, that's a really good question. I would prefer probably like rainy, windy days in November. That's when it's the easiest to just like sneak up on a buck just being silly. But at the same time, I always I always say pick the one factor that you can take and use to your advantage. Now, some days, I'll use a couple examples here. Some days, a lot of people would say that you would never want to do it on a still, crisp morning. I love still, crisp mornings because I can just hear so much. But that's the one factor that I'm taking away. I can't cover as much ground, or I can't maybe go barreling into a spot quite like I can on, the wet, windy day. But if it's cold and crisp and not much wind, like you can just hear a deer coming way before they can hear you if you're going slow enough. You just got to change that cadence up. If you've got let's say a day where it's super windy and hot, you're going to your strategy again is going to change. If it's super windy, you can move super fast. You can just bounce around to these different areas. There's tons and tons of, I guess, different variations in weather conditions, but, I like to just pick that one thing that you can, as a hunter, can focus on beating the deer at. So whether that's sight or sound, there's generally something you can pull from any weather condition and just use that to your advantage.
That makes sense. Now, what about your basic, you mentioned like your cadence, how you're slowing it down in certain conditions, speeding it up in others. I feel like you did in Nebraska this year and kind of talked about in the past, you're kind of going into a new area and you're half scouting, half hunting, walking on the ground like that. Mm-hmm. Can you talked about what you're looking for from the scouting standpoint, but from the hunting standpoint, how fast are you typically going? Are you stopping every 5 yards and glassing, or you cover more ground, or kind of what does the actual process look like for you to make this work?
Well, there's two different totally different type of cadence. I guess there's tons of variation. I guess that's stupid to say, but there's two major differences. There's like the slow one, and then there's the fast one. And like the fast one is like generally just getting to a spot. And honestly, the fast one has produced buck sightings just as much as the slow one. And what's going on there, I think a lot of times, like just going fast, not really caring, like knowing that there's a good chance that we're going to bump into something. But sometimes I'm kind of purposely doing that, like kind of going a little too fast, because if there's one around, I want to know. I want to see him jump up and run, or I want to see him stand up and try to figure out what's going on. And my friend Sean and I were on a hunt last year where we were doing pretty much exactly that. We were planning on going way deeper into this piece of public, and we were moving pretty quick down, and we were kind of just starting to get into where there was the best bedding habitat, but we were still wanting to go deeper, and we were moving pretty quick, and a buck heard us. It was one of those windy days. He heard a twig snap, and he jumped up, and he started looking around. And he's like 50 yards away, but he couldn't see us. And like he heard us, but we saw him before he saw us. And he he's panicking. He's looking around. Ended up watching him go right back into that bedding area. Turned out he's with a doe, and we just kind of hung with him right in that area. And we almost got him a couple times. He was right at about 40 yards. We just needed him to come a little bit closer, but that, I guess, that aggressive cadence, that faster walking is almost like, Dan Infalt talks about like bed stacking, or like stacking up a bedding area. It's kind of the same thing, right? Like we're just kind of plowing through, or we're not necessarily plowing, but we're just moving fast enough that like if there's deer around, we want them to kind of know, kind of hear us. And then as we start getting towards those areas that we're really thinking about focusing on, we're going to slow down to the point of, if you can hear yourself and not hear anything else, you're going too fast. And I'm impatient. I have kind of bad habits of getting going a little bit fast, but if I notice that I'm doing that, I just try to, take a deep breath, calm down, and just like remember that I'm not necessarily trying to get anywhere. I don't have a point B that I need to be at. I'm hunting right now. And like, I have to be more aware of my surroundings and just calm myself down. And, Sean, my friend Sean Ferenbaugh, he works for Whitetail Properties now, but he worked at Midwest Whitetail for a little bit. Him and I he was kind of the first person to be like, yeah, let's try it. Let's try, doing more of this still hunting. And it took some time for us to really figure it out. And I used to pick on him a lot because he had this tendency of like all of a sudden he would just be going way too fast. You're like, dude, you got to slow down. Like, just remember, you're not trying to get to anywhere specific. You're now hunting. You're now looking for sign. You're looking for deer. You're trying to figure out, if I need to set up or just keep going. And I think it can vary so much, but back to your question, like, do you glass? Yeah, a lot of times we're just taking a few steps, and a lot of times we're doing that right on a deer trail. We're just using the deer trail to keep inching closer to where we think that they're spending their time during the daylight. And, you walk a few steps, glass, listen, sometimes stand there for a few minutes, sometimes stand there for 15 minutes. I think if you bump a deer, stand there for 15, 20 minutes, let things calm back down, and you'll find that a lot of times, those deer actually aren't even going that far. Like, they may just run up, bound 50 yards away, and then go right back to what they were doing because they weren't ever actually sure what was actually, really going on. If that wind's in your face and a deer sees you and you're wearing a ghillie suit, and it's like, well, what the heck is that?
Yeah.
And it just kind of runs out of sight. It's going to forget about you in 20 minutes. I mean, a lot of time. And, there was a couple hunts here in Nebraska that we just had where we literally, in this one hunt that we had, we popped up into this kind of overlooking this little bedding area. And I had seen deer bedded in there, does bedded in there last year. And we got up to the top of the hill, and right as we crested the hill, a fawn came running up out of the bedding area. Just totally random. Like, how fawns will just kind of start running around, like, and just playing around. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure that's what that fawn was doing, because it came, we crested the hill, and it was cresting right at the same time we were, and it blew and took off running while another doe stood up out of the bedding area, took off running, blowing, and then a few minutes later went by, some other deer would stand up, accidentally spooked them, they took off blowing. So we just sat there for like 15, 20 minutes, and sure enough, a buck that we had been hunting back in that area stood up right in the middle of where all those does had just flushed from. And he just stood up, just his antlers sticking out, and he just scanned that whole area for 10, 15 minutes before he even took a step. And I think that the mistake comes when you bump one deer and you just get pissed off and you just keep going. You're like, dang it, I didn't want to spook any deer, I don't want to bump into anything. Well, don't let that get you discouraged. Just know that, okay, we're getting close to more deer probably. Just slow down, take a minute, sit there, maybe have a snack, drink some water, just kind of hang out for a little bit, because sometimes if you get pissed off and you just keep plowing through it, you are going to continue to bump deer. But if you let things calm down, settle yourself down a little bit, and just get right back into that cadence after things have, calmed down, then a lot of times you're not hurting as much as if you just keep plowing through.
Mm-hmm. I love the idea of this, because I think one of the things that, if you talk to a lot of guys, even analyze our own hunts, like me and Dan, year after year, one of the things we always come back to is that, maybe we overhunted this spot, or maybe we didn't move fast enough on this new information. We didn't move the stand that day. We waited 2 days and it was too late. Mm-hmm. When you're on the ground, there's nothing mm-hmm. holding you back from making the move on the fly, being mobile, mm-hmm. Not overhunting the same thing. That, like you mentioned earlier, the power of the first sit. When you're hunting on the ground like this, you can do that every single hunt. Mm-hmm. It's very appealing. I hope, Dan, you do this. I hope you really do this, Dan, because I think this is, I think I'm going to, dabble with it a little bit more myself. I feel like any way you can.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, any way you can remove obstacles to doing the right thing, it's a good idea. So whether that means removing a tree stand completely so it's easier to make those moves when you need to, or something I did this year is I started testing a saddle because that would make things easier to make a quick move.
Oh, for sure.
I think all those things can help.
Well, and then the fact that
go ahead.
In Iowa, right? I mean, the first 15 to 20 days of October, there's still crops in the fields. So like for me, I can definitely see a scenario like that playing out where I'm just going and hiding in a cornfield, or I'm going and hiding in a buffer strip.
That could open up a whole new can of worms there, talking about crops being up versus not up. I mean, if there's ever a time to go in and blow up the world, go blow them up bedding in a cornfield. I mean, a lot of times,
Absolutely.
Growing up in Western Ohio, there's lots of bucks that are spending a lot of time in the corn. And, like, if there's a better time to go bust them out, I mean, they're not going to be there when that corn comes down. Like, if they're on an island of trees in the middle of a cornfield, like, they're going to bed there pretty consistently until that, those, factors change and the corn comes out. And then they're going to be somewhere completely different. Like, you might as well go after them then, because you're definitely not going to get them in the spots. I mean, they're just not spending time in those areas that they will be, a month or two down the road. Yeah. And I think, and honestly, the whole reason that I really kind of took this, ground hunting thing and just kind of ran with it is I want to at least help people feel confident about it and confident about trying something different. And I'm not saying that it's for everybody. I'm not, but I think that there's a lot of opportunity there that people are missing out on because, just kind of like that rule book has said for so long, like hunt out of a tree stand, don't bump into deer early in the season. Don't, I don't know, don't, spray your boots down and stuff. Like, I mean, all that stuff, like, is just, for me.
Don't wear blue.
Like, yeah. I would stick with that one. I would not wear blue.
Sorry, continue.
But, I think that, just having that confidence to be able to try something different, it's really, I want people to feel okay trying something different. I want people to feel okay when they bump a buck and try to learn something from it and not have a season of, I mean, and here's the main reason. When I was in college, I got into a rut. I got into, kind of a position where I was getting content, had stands where I'd killed bucks before. I had areas on public land that I'd, was, like consistent spots, and I just limited myself to that stuff. And limited myself to these areas that I'd, been scouting and been hunting for years, and, stands that I'd killed bucks in, and then it just got stagnant, and it just like nothing was the encounters weren't increasing. The amount of deer I was shooting was not increasing. It was just stagnant. It was all just the same. And I got super fed up with that and, just wanted to get outside of, my comfort zone a little bit. And even before I started hunting on the ground, I feel like, we were definitely doing that. It's just those years, I think back on them, and I'm, just really disappointed that I didn't start doing it earlier, just trying something different, trying to think outside of the box as much as possible. And, since then, the amount of encounters that I've had since I've started thinking outside the box, whether that's a tree stand, in a tree stand on the ground, whatever, that's when the encounters really started skyrocketing. Like, went from, maybe at the best years, even like in Iowa, we were, let's say, 5 really good encounters with the mature buck in Iowa. And then when we started going, just like really getting out of the comfort zone and really trying to push the envelope and get close to where these bucks were bedding, like the encounters just went like through the roof. Like, it's like every other time we're going out, we're just seeing a buck. Maybe we're not killing him necessarily, but we're like seeing way more bucks that we're looking to shoot than before. And, that really was eye-opening to me.
Yeah. There's something to be said about the fact that lots of times we do kind of limit ourselves by this arbitrary known way of you're supposed to do it, and you just kind of, it's easy to get stuck in that. Like, okay, this is the way you're supposed to do it, so you just do it that way. But to your point, you see one guy do it a different way, and you're like, oh, that can work. That kind of opens up all these new possibilities. That's exciting. So it's been cool to see, what Jared's been doing with Whitetail Adrenaline, what you're doing with this. Or all sorts of different ideas out there. Andre DeQuisto getting the bump and dump idea out there that I feel like now Dan and then you guys have been kind of evolving similar tactics around that. There's a lot of ways to skin the cat.
Yeah, and that's I think to your point, like I think that just having a playbook with all different types of plays in it is way more effective than just limiting yourself and feeling like you're limiting yourself to one specific tactic. Like I still like hunting funnels during the rut, and I still like hunting. I love one of the best setups I think in the flat river bottom country of Iowa is like get on a river with a perpendicular wind to that river channel and sit there. And like a buck is going to cruise down it, especially if you're close to where there's, really good bedding habitat. Like sitting on a river to me is like such an unbelievable tactic. It works out here super well, but like, I don't want to just be limited to that play. I don't want to be, I personally don't want to sit in a tree stand for 7 days straight on funnels. Like I like to do it occasionally, but I don't want to do it every single day of the season. And I also don't want to wait for that to be the only opportunity, I guess, if that makes sense, But
Yeah, it does. So 2 final questions on the ground hunting deal. Can you talk about how you're thinking about the wind when you are heading in, and then also if you decide to set up from the ground, if you think about wind differently at all than, if you're hunting in a tree stand? And then the last thing on that front, this is kind of a 2-part question. Part 2 is talk about actually getting the shot, getting drawn back, because it sounds like encounters are, definitely possible, but it's got to be a little bit harder to pull off those shots on the ground. So I'm curious about those 2 things.
Yeah, I think those are really good questions, and I think the thing about the wind, I think maybe my answer may be a little bit different than expected. Like what I found with the wind on the ground, now I approach it the same way that you would on going to a tree stand or with a tree stand setup. Like I'm always going into the wind or across wind. Like I don't ever want to have the wind in my back. And I like crosswinds just as much as I like the wind in my face. And the reason being is if sometimes I feel like if I'm going directly into the wind, that buck is just bedding with his face pointed right at me. If you've watched bucks bed, and a lot of, almost always they're bedding. I wouldn't say always, but they're almost always bedding facing downwind. Yeah. And that's why I kind of like that crosswind. Is sometimes I feel like you can kind of catch them from the side, and even Sean and I last year on November 19th, I think, we snuck up on 3 bedded bucks, and we were like 50 yards from them. We had a crosswind, and they had no idea we were there, and they had every advantage to see us, except for the way that we approached it with a crosswind. And then the other thing with the wind that I found is like when you're set up, you don't get as much of that crazy swirling and crazy thermal play that you get when you're 15, 20 foot up in a tree stand. Like your wind a lot of times is just like going into, kind of getting stuffed by cedars or willows or tall grass, whatever it may be. It's not traveling. It doesn't seem to travel quite as far as it does when you're elevated. Like it seems like your scent, your downwind area is way bigger. The spook zone, I guess, is like way bigger when you're in a stand than when you're on the ground. Consistently been spotted less on ground setups, and I would say pretty consistently have been winded less than tree stands, than tree stand setups. It sounds weird, but like do a lot of we carry milkweed with us all the time, and like a lot of times you drop that milkweed and it just like gets stuffed by something, and it doesn't seem like it's traveling quite as far as when you get up in a stand. You got all that open ground down below you for that wind to get down, catch weird, different thermals, different swirls.
Definitely
in the
makes
wind,
sense, man.
It's like it's been a really eye-opening. Just seeing how that wind goes away from the ground setup. It's pretty crazy. I'm really, really pleased with that. And I'm the stinkiest guy ever out there. Like I don't use any I don't have enough time with all the editing and stuff we do. We don't have any time to do any type of trying to control our scent and try to smell anything less than just a stinky human. So like I want to know that wind isn't just doing crazy stuff, and I found on the ground it just seems to be just a little bit more consistent and just doesn't seem to travel as far. And then I guess as far as the shot goes, I love the shot opportunities because it's like you're shooting at a target. When you get up in the tree stand and elevated, you're starting to talk about some weird angles sometimes, especially if you're getting way up in a tree stand. I've actually been talking a lot about this year. We actually got some saddles, tree saddles as well, and we're excited about trying those.
Yeah, pretty sweet.
We've been talking, I think the opportunity is unbelievable just being mobile.
Yeah.
But, the shot, and I'll touch on drawing in a minute, but, the shot angles have been a huge game changer for me because the shots that I messed up when I was younger, I used a lot of climbing stands when I was younger. That was my mobile setup because in Ohio, the trees aren't quite as bushy as they are out here in Iowa. And like Ohio trees are really straight, like telephone poles. Like you don't have a lot of that horizontal branch and kind of that brushy type tree that you get in other parts of the Midwest. So I was a lot of times just trying to get super, super far up in trees in the climber, and that in turn would like get these really horrible angles to where a lot of the shots that I messed up, I really, in hindsight now, think if I would have just been lower, I would have had more vitals to work with. The higher you get, the weirder that angle gets. And I've made a lot of shots on deer that, I've made a lot of shots on deer that I have recovered all these, but, like one lung liver, and that's a lot of that has to do with like a high tree stand angle. When you're on the ground, you're shooting at that deer like eye level flat. Like you've got all that to work with. You don't have any weird angles from being too far up. And that's my favorite part about the ground hunting is the shot angles. And when one's at 20 yards, he never looks like he's further than 20 yards. He looks like he's 20 yards, like it's like you're shooting at your 3D target in the backyard. It's awesome.
That's nice.
Like so instinctual, you just draw back, center that pin, and you don't have to think about much more than that. And then I guess as far as drawing, I actually just got a hold of a Matthews Triax, and I love that thing because it's super short.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what is it, 28 inches? Do you have one, Mark?
I do, yep. It's
28 inches?
It's 28 inches. That thing feels so tiny.
Yeah, and I love that because like that makes it so easy to draw on the ground. I do a lot of like basically put that bottom limb parallel to the ground as close as I can and draw the bow facing down and then rise up. Like if you watch the buck I killed in Iowa last year, and that one's a little bit different. I actually stood all the way up because I knew that when he was going behind a bush, I could just stand up and draw. But the biggest thing is just keeping your profile low. If they're going to be able to see you, keep that profile low, and then I just ease up to them. And I practice draw on a ton of deer to make sure that and I highly recommend that whether you're in a tree stand or you're in a on the ground tree saddle, whatever. Like the more experience you get practice drawing, the better you get at just making that decision, and it just comes more natural when it's a moment of truth. But the biggest thing is keeping a low profile and just, using the vegetation and the terrain to your advantage. Like if you can't see his eyes and you got a chance to draw, do it then and be ready. And I've actually found that it's pretty easy to pull off, especially in grassy habitat. If you got enough grass that, like, I sit on my knees mostly, and like if I'm sitting on my knees and I can draw that bow below that line of vegetation, a lot of times it's pretty easy to do without them seeing you.
Yeah, it's all about that timing, it seems like.
Yeah, same as if you're in a tree stand.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Dan, I know you got to drop off here kind of soon, so do you have any final thing you want to make sure we cover with Zach before you have to bail?
I'm kind of curious when it comes to like making the decision, right? I mean, there had to be a whole bunch of failures in what you do that led you to the method that you're hunting right now. So maybe like talk about a couple big failures that were maybe aha moments. That's like, hey, gosh darn it, man, I should have done this.
Well, I guess as far as the cadence and moving, or like the setups, like once you've got to a spot, that a lot of that's just like major hard, like hard loss, trial and error, right? Like, yeah, we didn't have enough cover there. Or one thing that really sticks out to me, there was a hunt last year, I believe it was October 18th, and there was this bedding area that I had hunted. I actually jumped a buck out of it the year prior, and just by hunting back there the year prior, I kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together, and there was this scrape line I knew of that was right on the transition line of the bedding area, and Jake and I went in there to still hunt it that morning. And I'll be darned if like we weren't going in there. I was sitting there talking to the camera, so stupid, like about all the sign that we were seeing and like how it was, looking really good. And, we're basically talking about, hey, we found the hot sign, right? And sure enough, we were sitting in a place where we didn't have enough cover, and we weren't set up. We were going to continue moving, but like this was a huge, like learning, like point of learning. Like we messed this up so bad. I had a decoy. I had one of those heads up silhouette decoys, and I had that. So that was a little bit of cover, but like we were just pretty much sitting out in the open. Now we both had ghillie suits on, so that definitely helps, but we didn't have any like big trees or anything around us. We were just kind of sitting out like sore thumb. A little bit of grass beside us, which helped us a little bit, but sure enough, we're sitting there, and like this is all like captured on video. I'm just like, wait, do you hear that? It's like, that's got to be a buck like scraping. Like it just was like, whoa, 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 that classic, just like bucking there, just hoofing up the place. And sure enough, I look up and just this tank is standing there looking towards us.
Oh, geez.
And I was like, oh no, like he's too close. Like we're in a bad spot. So I did my best to get that decoy in front of me, and I did get it set up and kind of shoved it down on the ground so it's sitting up in front of me, and he saw it. He started to circle downwind, and he's in bow range. He's 30 yards, but I didn't have a really good clear shot. And I got drawn on him and everything, but I just didn't have a good shot. But like he eventually just got weirded out by the situation, blew, and just kind of slowly bounded and then walked away. And that moment was like, hey, if you're still hunting, never stop where there's not cover, dude. Like that's so dumb. Like why were we just sitting out in the middle of the open? I really think that if we would have just had a big tree to hide most of our body behind, like we'd have got a shot at that buck. I think he would have tried to circle downwind of that decoy and got in very, very close range of us, and then we'd have been able to shoot him. Yeah. But just the fact that we had nothing else was a huge, like, don't do that anymore. And like now, and another thing that I maybe should have touched on earlier when we were talking about cadence is like always looking at the next place of like, okay, we're here now. We've got cover. If a deer shows up, this is how I'm going to draw. This is where, I've got a shot here. I've got a shot here. But then if we're going to make 10 more yards, like that's the next place. And then that's the shooting lane. You're almost picking the next spot before you get to it. You kind of have a small goal in mind, or maybe you make it halfway. Maybe I make it halfway and a deer starts coming towards us. Like, how are we going to make cover work? It's got to be a constant thing in your mind of like, how can I grab some cover real quick and make it work? Mm-hmm. And I think that we learned that hard that day. Like, I mean, it's silly and it's funny now, but like, we were just like, how did we just make that mistake? Like, that was so dumb. Like, we literally were exactly where we expected them to be working that scrape line. And that's exactly what he was doing. Everything that we had planned was right, except for we just didn't have enough cover, and it was just silly.
Yeah.
And that was a hard one.
My first year elk hunting, my buddy I was with said this same thing. Never stop in an opening. Never stop or do a calling sequence or take any time to glass or anything unless you're set up somewhere with cover, because exactly what you said. Things can happen so quick. They can all of a sudden be an elk that shows up, and if you aren't set up with cover, you're stuck hung out to dry, and you just always need to plan for that happening. Be ready for it just in case it does, because the one time that it happens and you're not ready, you had the moment you had, and shake your head kind of moment.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what was the most disappointing was that Jake and I both are like, really, really into turkey hunting, and like one of my biggest like pet peeves is like calling without like previously looking for a place that you can dive into. Like, if I'm not standing right beside it, I'm, a step from it, because if a bird gobbles and he's inside of 50 yards, like, he might be coming right now.
Yeah.
And you need to grab that cover. And it's like, that was it just totally went over our head when we were deer hunting that day. Yeah. And I think that, I hope to never make that mistake again. Surely I will at some point, but we learned a lot from it that day. And I guess one other thing I wanted to quickly touch on, to kind of get to, I guess getting to that point of, really looking hard for that hot sign and not setting up until you find it is, when I was talking about being in a rut at one point and hunting and, kind of doing the same old, it was like, you'd go into these spots and it's like, the sign's not there, the scrape that might've been there the year prior isn't hot. It isn't opened up. The rubs aren't there. And I just feel like I wasted so many sits in spots that like are good spots, but just aren't the hot spots. And just, looking back at old footage, looking back at, from high, I started filming, just with my buddies, like when we were in high school. So I have like tons of things I could go back and look at. And it's like, those days we were having the best hunts, it's like we're always in the hot sign. The days that we were having the bad hunts, we were always not in the hot sign. And I think that that's really one of the big steps that led me into this more mobile style of hunting. And obviously, like, listening to guys like Dan and learning more about this betting how bucks bed and all that has definitely played a role in that as well. But, the big thing was just like feeling like at one point there was just a bunch of time wasted in not hot spots.
Yeah. So something that I think includes a lot of the ideas we talked about so far is your Iowa kill last year. You briefly touched on that a bit, but I feel like if I remember that hunt right, there was a little bit of there was the ground hunting, there was some hot sign you guys noticed, there was being in this new area with, I think there was like a standing cornfield or a cut cornfield or something like that you were playing off of. Can you walk us through that and maybe use that as an example to illustrate some of the things we talked about?
Yeah. So I guess there was one actually other really important factor, and that was hunting pressure. That day, it was November 13th, and like it just seemed like that day everybody was out, and ended up running into a guy that I've actually met on public land in Ohio. Super crazy. I ran into him that day. Met him twice in the middle of nowhere. He's from Vermont, and just happened to run into him twice, which was pretty cool.
Wow.
And ran into him, actually ended up running into his dad later that morning, and like just ran into a number of different hunters throughout that whole day. And we were just, again, not like locking on to a spot. We were just like, okay, it doesn't feel right. Let's bail. And we went in that day. We were probably at like 5 different public land locations throughout that day. We never went home, but we just kept bouncing around, kind of poking into spots, and if it didn't feel good, we just left. And eventually we got to thinking about, we'd hunted on the other side of the river on that same piece that we ended up going into that night and shooting the buck at. It was like, I told Jake, I was like, that standing cornfield really interests me, because if that's standing corn, I would imagine not a lot of people are walking way back in there, going through the corn, and then getting into that bedding area. And I had scouted that bedding area with my buddy from Ohio. My parents were there. And we just scouted it that spring prior, and, it seemed like a really good place to be during the rut. So we started easing in there, and right away you could tell that there was hunting pressure kind of around the edges. Like, there were stands up around that standing cornfield, and you could see where somebody had been walking in there quite a bit. But as we got deeper in there, all of a sudden the scrapes started popping up. And then as we started to get into the edge of and then we got back even further, and one of those cornfields had just been recently cut, and there were buck tracks in the mud. It was real kind of a damp day and damp evening the night before. And there was all kinds of really fresh big buck tracks out in that cut cornfield. And we were easing our way back and got to the edge of the bedding area, started seeing, rubs popping up, scrapes, trails everywhere. And we eventually got into the middle of the bedding area, and we did bump a deer on the way in. We blew a bunch, totally spooked one. I was assuming it was a doe. I don't know if that's the right assumption or not, but we were just like, okay, if we've bumped into a deer, we've seen all this sign, we're being really quiet, like nothing else. No, the only reason that deer spooked is because they got our wind. Like, everything, upwind of us should have no idea we're here. Sign looks good. Everything looks good. Let's set up here. And if we need to go further tomorrow, we only had like an hour and a half left. At that point in the day, we'd been all over the place, and like we were kind of running out of time. So we decided, all right, we're going to set up here, and if it's no good tonight, we'll go deeper. And the whole strategy was, there was kind of this little mini funnel within that bedding area where all the deer were coming out of their beds, and they were walking down this like very small strip of canary grass. Everything else was like thick cattails or willows, and like right in the middle there was kind of a little high rise, and there was just canary grass growing on that, and all those deer were coming out right on that kind of little transition line. And our theory was, if a buck is following some does up and out of there, we might get lucky and he's going to come right through here. But another thing that we think about a lot, and we've been talking about a lot the last year or so, is like bucks crossing doe trails. That's like kind of just a more effective way for them to kind of check for the hot doe. It's like they're just they're going perpendicular to the bulk of the trails. Like, a lot of the trails are just, A to B, bed to food. And you find a lot of scrapes and rubs that are going straight perpendicular to that. And we just started thinking, it's like, okay, if that's the case, like there's obviously a reason. And we started setting up on that a lot more last year, and saw lots of bucks doing that, just going exactly perpendicular to the bulk of the deer movement. They're just cutting those doe's trails looking for the hot doe. It's more efficient than them going and checking every bedding area. Instead, they're just going and looking at all those trails. They're just on one line. And I guess the theory was, like I said, a buck's either going to follow the does out on this little patch of canary grass on the transition, or he's going to come across here, come across in front of us cutting these trails.
So what was your wind doing?
Whole night goes. Our wind was going it would have been perpendicular to those trails. So we were set up 20 yards from those trails, anywhere from like 7 yards to 25 yards from those trails. And they were going in front of us, east and west, and the wind was coming out of the south. And the wind was blowing towards mostly cattails, where we expected the least amount of deer to come from. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
Kind of just going into a mass of cattails. And like I said, like, we blew a deer like right before we set up because it was bedded out in those cattails. But it was just one, and we knew if there was one, there'd probably be some more. So we just didn't worry too much about it and just set up. And really nothing happened for the longest time. And I was getting impatient and, classic. And I'm standing up we were kind of tucked up under a willow. It's an unbelievable setup. It was really, really nice. It had tons of cover there, but there was this like big willow trunk that kind of like ran along the ground and then went up. So I could stand up on that trunk and I could get like 3 more feet up in the air and see further into that bedding area. So Jake is with me. He's filming, and he was just like laying on the ground looking at his phone or something. And I'm standing up on this log glassing into that bedding area. And I remember saying something along the lines of just like, how are we not seeing any deer? Because like we were in the middle of just like, the hot side. Like, how are there no deer in here? And like 30 seconds later, I hear crack, like this big branch snap. And I look to my right, and I just see antlers sticking up in the grass. And it's just super dumb of me. I just moved too fast. I panicked because I was like, he's right on top of us. I mean, he's 45 yards coming right at us. I panicked and I moved. And he looked up, and he saw movement. But I'm wearing that ghillie suit, and I just slowly slouched down. I can see that he's looking at me, but I just slowly slouched down, grabbed my bow, and I'm like, Jake, there's a buck coming right at us. Like, get ready. And sure enough, he pops right out of that stuff. And at this point, he's 30 yards, and he pops right out, and he looks right at us for one or 2 seconds, and he just doesn't see anything, and he just keeps on going. And he came about 5 more yards closer, and he cut those trails, and then got to the end of where he wanted to go, and he started to circle right back into that bedding area. Now, he's not going out towards those fields at all. He's going deeper back into that bedding area. That's exactly what he was doing, is he was cutting those trails, and then he was going to loop right back in there. He wasn't going to go out towards the ag. He wasn't going to go out towards that open ground. It's getting close to dark, but he's going right back into that bedding area. And I had some shooting lanes picked out, and, when I was envisioning the spot working, I was like, man, how awesome would it be if one just walked and put his head right behind that big bush? And it's like, I think I could draw and just stand up. And sure enough, that's exactly what he did. He went right behind a big pile of brush out there. I just drew and stood up, and as soon as he stepped out, I stopped him and shot him at 25 yards. And a lot of that is, I think how we ended up getting to that spot is, kind of like you said, all those things that we've touched on. It's like avoiding the pressure, looking for the hot sign, and just being mobile. We could have very well set up on a number of other places that day, but it's like we just try not to get too caught up in a spot that maybe has been good in the past. It's like if the sign's not there, it's not worth sitting it. But we knew when we got into that spot that we were going to hunt it that night, and we were going to hunt it the next day. Like, if we didn't kill one that night, I guarantee we would have been back in there the next day because the sign was just on fire.
Yeah, that's awesome. It is cool to see all those things kind of line up to make that hunt. And so many times you can do 99.9% of the things right, and then something still goes wrong. But it's nice when all the lessons learned, all these things you've been thinking about, every once in a while, once or twice a year, maybe they line up and everything falls in place and it works out. So it's total trial and error too. I mean, it's just like any type of hunting. I mean, you're going to fail for sure, but I think that like you said, it's fun when it finally works out, because most times it doesn't. My favorite saying in hunting and in life is,
you win some, but you lose most. You can't let the losses get you down. You just got to keep going after it.
Man, that is the truth. So, well, I feel like there's 19 other things I still want to talk about, but we're pushing close to 2 hours here, so we better wrap it. But what's the plan for the rest of the year? Where else are you guys headed?
Tomorrow morning we're going to Minnesota, and we're going to be hunting with Dan Infault.
Nice.
Do-it-yourself sportsman. His name's Garrett. I don't know if you're familiar with Garrett's work. He's on YouTube. And then a couple of other members from the Hunting Beast will be there, and we're going to go hunt some Minnesota public land, have some fun, and we're calling it the Public Land Challenge, but there's actually no real challenge. We just want to, kind of document how we're all approaching things a little bit differently. We all have fairly similar aggressive hunting type styles, but it's just going to be a fun way to not really even, I guess, compare showing anything that's better, just showing how it's all different.
Yeah.
And we're excited about that. And then we'll do Missouri for sure, Iowa for sure. I really, really, really am hoping that it's all going to line up and I'm going to be able to get to Ohio. I kind of want to go to, my plan right now is to hit Ohio 1 through 10, and then November 1 through 10. And then, what else? Alabama is looking like a thing that we're definitely going to try. And then that would be later in the season. And then Greg might go back to Nebraska. I know he really wants to go back to Nebraska, which would be really cool. Kind of try to hit it at a different time frame than we have the last couple of years. Probably a little bit of Wisconsin here and there, and then if we get lucky and put some tags on some bucks, maybe even a couple more. Well,
I know some good stuff in Michigan I can point you towards if you ever head this direction. It's
I would love to hunt Michigan, man. It's definitely on the high priority list. That and just anywhere in the East, I guess, is I'm really drawn to, just being from there. I've always wanted to travel, in the states bordering Ohio. So places like Indiana, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, New York. New York's really high on the priority list.
Yeah.
Michigan, all those places. Sadly, you can't do them all in 1 year, though. That's the tough part.
Can't do it all, but it sounds like you guys are going to give it one hell of a try. So,
yeah, that's right.
I'm looking forward to following along. So, Zach, I appreciate you taking the time to do this just before taking off for a big trip and all that, and can't wait to see how it all goes.
Yeah, no problem. I'm really happy to talk hunting. I appreciate you having me on. I could probably talk for another couple days here at least, but
yep. Well, we'll have to do a follow-up sometime, maybe later in the season or early next year, see how it all went.
Yeah, sounds good. Appreciate it.
All right, good luck this season, Zach, and we'll talk to you later. And that's going to do it for us today, so hope you enjoyed this one as much as I did. I thought Zach had some really interesting things to share. Just a lot of ideas that get me thinking. So who knows? Maybe I'll be running around on the ground this year a little bit, trying some things out. I know it's a very intriguing proposition, and a lot of his public land ideas I know I've already been putting into action in different forms based off some of the other people he's learned from. I've learned from too, and I certainly think there's a lot of potential there as well. So good stuff here. I guess before we wrap this thing up, if you haven't yet subscribed to the YouTube channel or the podcast, we would love it if you could do that. If you want to leave a rating or review on iTunes, that would be much appreciated as well. And I guess otherwise, I just want to wish you a ton of luck if you're out there hunting. I know hunting seasons are open for a whole lot of people now, so good luck out there, shoot straight, and until next time, stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins.